So 21 years ago in the year 2000, I was in primary school, primary 4 precisely. I had just written a double promotional exam to primary 6. And I was on holiday. It was during this Easter holiday. My school was on the island, St. Mary's Private School at the time. But we had just relocated to the mainland. We were living in Ketu at the time. And this particular day, my mom was going to work, April 20th. And because we had just vacated April 19th, the day before, and I was a handful as a child. So my mother did not want to juggle between running after me at work and then, doing her work. So she decided to leave me back at home. And she left for work on the island. But prior to that time, usually she would wake me up in the morning and then we would prepare together, since her work was also on the island. So when I get to her office in the morning, the school bus comes to pick me from the office and then I go to school. But because, like I said, I was on holiday this time, I stayed back at home. And I was still sleeping when my mother went to the office. And my uncle was also working on the island, so we all used to leave the house together. And back in the house was myself, was my grandma, my auntie, my mother, and my uncle. So when my uncle and my mother left the house, it was just my grandma, myself, and my aunt. And we were all still asleep, because this was like, how Lagos is, you have to wake up early to achieve anything. So this was still like maybe past 5 in the morning. After she left, I was sleeping when suddenly the door of my mother's room thrust open. As a child, I opened my eyes and I looked towards the door and I saw my auntie. She was looking so scary. We did not know that she had manic depression, which is a mental, illness. We didn't know she was suffering from that. We already knew she was aggressive and she displayed symptoms of aggression every now and then, but we just thought it was mere aggression. We had no mental health awareness or exposure to have been able to consider that, maybe she had some underlying mental illnesses. So she came to me very young. She pulled me by my hair and told me to leave my mother's room. I left.
At that time you could see?
I could see, yes. Oh. I was born sighted. I could see. So I left my mother's room because she was looking scary. As a child, you don't want to start arguing why. So I quickly left. And when I left, I went to my grandmother's room. She came again to my grandmother's room and told me to go to my uncle's room. I went to my uncle's room. I was sleeping again as a child. I didn't think I had anything to worry about. While I was there, I started hearing my grandma scream. So I came out of the room and tried to peep into my grandma's room. And then I saw that she was pressing down my grandma's chest. Oh. It was a horrible sight for me as a child. So I ran in there and she was angry. So she took me back to my uncle's room and locked the door. Oh. So I couldn't step out. I was there. And after a while, I did not hear my grandma screaming. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know. I couldn't have thought, she died or anything. But while I was in my uncle's room, she came in and she started walking around my uncle's room. And, because I was scared, fear was all over me. And I asked her what she was looking for. At that time, you just want to do anything to pacify so that, you just get yourself free from whatever trouble is looming. So when I asked her what she was looking for, she told me she was looking for a knife. And so my uncle at the time had this attitude of, eating only fruits every time he came back home at night. So I went straight to his table and there was a knife. So I wanted to tell her that the knife was there, but thankfully I opened my mouth, but I couldn't voice anything. So we were both standing at the dressing table, and then it was like that just fueled her anger. She became so angry, raised to power 10. And she said, why am I looking at her like that? And I said, I was just trying to tell her, see the knife, but I couldn't say anything. So my auntie pulled me. I had this ponytail then, and my hair was pretty long. So she took me by my ponytail, took me to my uncle's bed, and threw me to the floor. She pulled me again from the floor, took me like, she climbed my uncle's bed, took me, you know, I told you she had mental problems, but we did not know then. So she took me like ceiling level, hanging me like this, and then dropped me again on the floor. I landed with my head, I started screaming. She picked me and hit me, slammed my head severally on the burglary. I became bloodshot. Then she put me in between her legs, you know, the position when you want to make a child's hair. And then she started dipping her fingers in my eyes until both eyes popped out. And when they popped out, they were suspended by a little thread like something, could have been a nerve or so. On my cheeks, they were suspended. And she left the house. But thankfully, people saw her because she had stripped naked when she got to the street. So people knew what's going on. They came to the house, they called out. I was bleeding profusely from both sockets. Nobody could hear me when I was screaming because she had turned on the generator. When they came to the house, they knocked and knocked. Nobody could open the door. I didn't even know if my grandma was there or not because I was in my pool of blood. Eventually, they went around the house until they got to my grandma's window. Thank God, my grandma used to have this very loud way of snoring. And you know, sometimes God can just hide your blessings in such annoying things. We used to complain so much about her snoring, but that was what saved me that day. Had they not heard her snore, they would have thought nobody was at home and they would have left. So when they heard her snoring, they insisted and kept banging at the window until she woke up. And she woke up and she said, "What's that? What's that? Thief." They said, "No, they're not thieves. You should come to the door." So when she went to the door, she saw a crowd at the door. "What is going on here?" she asked. They said, "Who is at home?" She said, she mentioned my auntie's name and she said, "Me." And they said, "Okay, call out the auntie." She called out the auntie. There was no response. She said, "Okay, what about Mary?" They said, "What about Mary?" She called me out. I could hear her, but I was dying. I couldn't answer. Eventually, I knew if I didn't muster all the strength I had, I would just die there. So I mustered and I answered. I said I was here, but I was dying. So she got angry. "How can you say such a thing? You know, I come from a very Christian home." So she eventually traced me to where I was, and when she saw me in that state, you bet she fainted. They tried to resuscitate her, and quickly they took me to the hospital. My grandma was so confused that she took nothing with her except the key of the house, not even 5 naira. And she was an illiterate. Now this is where health workers come in. When we got to the hospital, this happened 7:30 a.m. When I checked the time before the incident happened, it was around 7:30 a.m. When we got to the hospital, the doctor said they were not going to admit me because they needed a police report, they needed a lawyer, they needed many things. My grandma was an illiterate. She couldn't write, she couldn't read. So she told them, "Okay, start attending to the child." And it wasn't in the GSM days. It was later that year that GSM came in. So she said, "Okay, she's going to send somebody to the island to get my mom, but they should start treating me." But the doctors utterly refused to start anything. The patients that were there were begging, you know, that they should start treating this girl. This girl is dying, because the 2 eyes were swinging here and there on my cheeks. But the doctors refused to do anything. And so we stayed there until, you know, the Lagos traffic and everything. My mother got to the hospital. She got to the hospital around 4:30 or so. When she got to the hospital, sun had beaten us, wind had contaminated the sockets, everything had happened to me. When they eventually admitted me, and they started treatments. But unfortunately, when they took me for surgery, they said the eyes had been contaminated beyond repair. They couldn't be salvaged. And so they gave my mother the very painful option to totally cut them out. And that was what they did. Had they answered us early enough, at least one eye would have been salvaged. But they didn't. And it pains me because 21 years after, we still hear stories of people going to the hospital and going through the same horror in the hands of nurses and doctors. So that's why I'm really happy that we have health workers here today that can raise awareness and advocate. Because when we hear the doctors, when they swear their Hippocratic oath, right? That's what they call it. It means that lives are supposed to be taken first. That's priority. I don't know how we became, quote and unquote, callous, such that we do not regard lives anymore. I feel this is the right time for us to sound the bell, sound the alarm once and again, over and again, until it sinks that life is priority over any other thing. Thank you.